Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Tea with the Experts webinar. We're so grateful that you've taken the time to come along and hear about the wonderful research that we're so proud to be supporting. My name is Jenny and I'm the Communications and Corporate Partnerships Manager at Heart Research Australia. And I'm so excited today to introduce you to our host, Chris Russell. Chris is the voice behind the Ag Reminders podcast and was also one of the hosts on the New Inventors TV show, if you remember that one. He's one of our dedicated ambassadors and volunteers and is so passionate about the work that we do that he has also confirmed a gift in his will. Chris generously volunteers his time to host these sessions, and we're so incredibly grateful for the ongoing support. It's so fantastic to welcome Dr. Daniel Brieger here. He's a cardiologist who completed his training and fellowship at Royal North Shore Hospital in 2024 and is about to begin a full-time PhD at the University of Sydney. His research, which we are so incredibly proud to support, thanks to the generosity of our donors, is focused on understanding why some people are more susceptible or more resilient to cardiovascular disease. Today's webinar will take a closer look at his project, and it's so fantastic to be able to hear this from the researcher himself. Dr. Brieger will be explaining how genes, proteins, and immune cells interact in the development or prevention of heart disease, and how his findings could lead to new ways to prevent and treat it. Thank you so much again for attending, and I will pass you over to Chris and Dr. Brieger to get started.
Yes, thank you very much, Jen, and fantastic to have a chat with you, Daniel, about this work. It kind of follows on from some previous chats we've had about this. Just tell us a bit about your background, because you're already a doctor, as in looking after us type doctor. But this is now a PhD project, which you're going to become a proper doctor, as they say.
Yes,
and so what has been mainly your interest as a GP or as a general practitioner? Yeah.
So I'm a cardiologist actually, rather than a GP. So I did my university training in Sydney, and then I did my general physician training through RPA, and then I decided to specialise in cardiology, and I did that through the Royal North Shore Hospital, and did some further training in imaging, so looking at CT and MRI of the heart to really help diagnose advanced heart disease and coronary disease. And throughout my training, there's a lot of questions in medicine and cardiology that we can answer and a lot that we still can't answer. And I really became interested in discovering answers and helping to contribute to answers to these questions that we don't know, like why some people have heart attacks and why people don't. And a fantastic opportunity to do a PhD with Professor Gemma Figtree, who I think might have spoken with you before, looking at that exact question. And so that's how I ended up on this PhD, which really explores why some people do have heart attacks, why some people don't, why people with all the risk factors walk through life without any problems, and people with very few risk factors really have heart attacks early, and what the missing piece of this puzzle is.
So, yeah, Gemma, I call her Wonder Woman. She's an amazing person. And she's talked to us before about these Smurfs, she calls them. And just to remind me what a Smurf is.
So Smurf that's a term that Gemma and her team coined a few years ago. It stands for Standard Modifiable Risk Factors. So when we talk about heart disease, and specifically I'm talking about atherosclerosis, so the development of plaque in the heart arteries, which is the main cause of heart attacks. We're talking about the risk factors which we've known about for about 50 years or so. So that's smoking, which we learned early on was a major risk factor and very easy to prevent. High cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes. And those are the ones that are modifiable in that we have therapies and ways to treat them. So that's what the Smurfs are. And people who are Smurfless are people who don't have any of those risk factors. And that's particularly important in the context of heart disease.
Now, my understanding from the discussion we had with Gemma, I think last year, was that a significant proportion, my memory is about a quarter of people who have cardiac events, particularly heart attacks where, a blood clot actually blocks off the artery or a plaque blocks off the artery, actually don't have, if you looked at them as a doctor, you'd say, well, you're fit as a scrub bull, you don't have to worry about it. Don't have diabetes, you're not overweight, you have never smoked, you don't have high cholesterol, and so for that reason, they've never had any treatment of any sort because there's nothing to treat them for. And so therefore the death rate amongst those people also higher because they've got really no protection. They weren't expecting to have this. So do we have any idea why these people currently do have heart attacks?
Yeah, you raise a good point. The first, I suppose, has this group of people. You said about a quarter of people are smurfless at the time of a heart attack, and that number's probably increased, I suppose, over the past 10 to 15 years. I think some data suggested that it was about 11% in the sort of mid-2000s or early 2010s, and the most recent data suggests it's up to 25%.
Well, that's probably because we're treating all the other people, and therefore less of them are having heart attacks.
That's probably it, isn't it? Yes. We're managing the blood pressure, we're managing the cholesterol, even before people know about healthy living much more now than they did 20, 30 years ago. And we know what to do, so they're not even developing these risk factors that need to be managed. And of course, that number probably varies a bit depending on where that study's done. This is groups in Singapore, in America, in the UK, all show relatively similar numbers within a margin of about 5%. So yes, the group of smurfless patients is rising. And the question of why is, I think, as you say, we're a few things. We're managing all these risk factors, and we've got a really good primary prevention team model in Australia. We've got great family medicine, we've got great GPs. People get screened for all of these risk factors and before they even develop. So we are managing them earlier and earlier and preventing the development of these risk factors. So what we see is that people who are presenting with heart attacks, a quarter of them don't have any of these risk factors. And we need to figure out, well, why? We had this great model. It was fantastic. If you don't smoke, if you don't have diabetes, if you keep your cholesterol under control, you'll be fine. You won't have a heart attack. And it's increasingly being shown that it's not that simple, unfortunately. The other thing that's important to note is that blood pressure and cholesterol, we've drawn a line in the sand and says this is high and this is low, but nothing in life or biology exists on that. You can't just flick a switch and go from high to low. It's all a spectrum, isn't it? So the cholesterol is what we call normal, but normal for one person isn't necessarily normal for another, and people can develop plaque with a cholesterol that's not very high at all, and other people can have a very high cholesterol and not develop any plaque. So it's about finding what is missing. It's more than just the cholesterol story. It's more than just the diabetes story. It's how do all of these risk factors interact with the individual to lead them to develop plaque.
So, Daniel, there's so many things that we hear about as if you like, lay people that are related to our autoimmune system, our own ability to not, to reject. And if we didn't have an autoimmune system, I suppose we'd all be dead by the age of 3 months old, probably, when you look at all the things you can catch and do. So does the immune system have anything to do with this whole atherosclerosis type story as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And atherosclerosis, that's our sort of fancy term for the development of plaque. What we know from early animal studies is that plaque, and from human studies, is that plaque starts to develop even from the ages of about 20. And they're called fatty streaks, and you can see them in the aorta, which is the main vessel in the middle of the body, the main artery. And the way it develops is an interaction of this cholesterol with the immune cells, specifically macrophages, which are a type of immune cell, which eat up the cholesterol and then sit in the vessel wall and then release these chemicals, which we call cytokines, which cause other immune cells to accumulate. And they all come together and they all start becoming we call it dysregulated, but they all start throwing around immune signals and saying, this is a pathology, this is a problem, which further leads to more inflammation, and that inflammation causes ultimately destruction and scarring. And that's what the sclerosis part of atherosclerosis is. And as a result of all this hyperinflammation, this plaque builds and builds and builds until it develops and ruptures, causing a heart attack. And there's a couple of things that we know about how the immune system's involved. One is that there are blood tests that you can do to look at inflammation in the body. They're very crude. They don't necessarily tell you where, but they are overall suggest a degree of inflammation. And people with higher levels of this blood test, which is called CRP, have got higher rates of cardiovascular disease. So we've not known that from huge numbers of studies. The other thing that we've shown is that if you treat the immune system, if you use general immunosuppressive therapies or immunomodulatory therapies, you can reduce the risk of heart disease. And there are two drugs that have been quite well studied. This one is colchicine, which is often a gout medicine, but it's been used and studied in heart disease prevention. And it probably shows that there is a mild to modest reduction in cardiovascular events and heart attacks. but it doesn't necessarily reduce death overall. So the effect is quite modest. And the other one is quite a powerful immunosuppression agent called canakinumab. It's got a fancy word. And that did show a reduction in heart attacks, but because it's quite powerful, actually increased the risk of infections in the trial. So it sort of balanced out. Yeah, we're less likely to have a heart attack, but you're more likely to have something like sepsis. So we're not using that in medicine nowadays. But all of these medications support the theory that if you can find a way to target the immune system precisely, you can probably reduce the plaque development and reduce heart attacks.
And that's really how, when we go and have a flu shot, we're putting things in to stimulate the immune system to producing things that'll eat up the bad cells, aren't we? That whole system revolves around creating something that the body says, hey, that shouldn't be here. I'm going to go and get rid of that. And that's the same thing that's happening here, except what you're saying is this is sort of out of control in this case.
Yeah, look, vaccinations are a fantastic example. They're tidy. You give a tiny molecule. It's clearly a pathogen. It's clearly causing a problem. So the body, the immune system recognizes it and it attacks it. But because in atherosclerosis, it's just an imbalance between healthy and abnormal, there's not yet a specific molecule that we can target and treat with the immune system. It's very hard to be so specific, which is why our treatments and studies so far in heart disease have been very non-specific. And as a result, when you non-specifically dampen the immune system, you get increased risk of infections through the whole body, which is really we're just swapping one problem for another.
So the first stage in this project then is to be able for someone to rock up to a doctor and get a blood test and say, yep, you may have this problem. Even though we don't have any of these other issues, you may have this immune system which is going to cause chaos in there. How are we going to by identifying those people for a starter?
That would be terrific. That's the magic, the silver bullet, if we can find it. We could do a blood test that says, you've got this chemical, be it you've got a protein that's the problem, you've got this gene fragment that's a problem, you've got these abnormal immune cells, and we know that is what's will cause you to have heart attack or high risk of heart disease, and we can treat it. That would be terrific. And for a while, LDL was that. We thought LDL is this is a molecule you can test in the blood. It's a type of cholesterol. If it's too high, it's causing heart attacks, so we need to bring that down. But as we've spoken about, that's not the whole story. There are missing pieces. So what my research is looking at is how can we further isolate any of these other molecules that you can test easily in the blood, which either show you're at increased risk of heart disease, you have heart disease, or you'll benefit from a particular type of treatment which targets that pathway or that molecule. And so that will be most of my PhD. And there are lots of groups around the world working on this because this is very personalized precision medicine. And the awesome example where this is working is cancer cells. Cancer treatments have really moved into the immunotherapy space. So they give immune medications which target, which help modulate the immune system to help fight cancer cells. And they've done a really good job at pioneering this therapy.
So once I noticed that last year, I seem to remember Gemma said you were not only looking at things like plaques, but you're also looking at fats. Well, I suppose fats are related to that anywhere, and enzymes and all sorts of other things for a kind of a marker that you can say, well, if that marker's there, that can only have come from this faulty system. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. That's it. That's right. And it's very complicated. We're using this thing called omics, which it starts to get very scientific, but we've got collaborators all around the country using fancy machines to really nail down the nitty-gritty of people who've had heart attacks and find out exactly what it is. Is it their fat content? Is it their protein? Is it their fragment of their protein? Is it a fragment of the fragment of the fragment of the protein? What is it? So it's going to take time, but it's really exciting work.
And when you found this, will you then treat them? I mean, obviously the government can't afford to put, statins in the water or, like they have with fluoride. So we don't treat everyone in the community for everything just in case they come across it. And I'm sure there'd be downsides of doing that anyway from a side effects point of view. But but once you have discovered someone who has this particular marker and you're pretty sure they're going to be one of these Smurfless candidates, are you going to treat them with the same drugs that we currently treat people who have got proven heart problems? Like ever since I had my heart attack in 2004, I've been on clopidogrel and ramipril and all those drugs just so I don't have another one. But they can justify that because I already had one. Is that what you're going to do with these people as well?
Yeah, and this will require lots and lots of research. So if just because we find someone that's at risk, we then need to prove that treating them reduces the risk. So there's a whole bunch of things that we find people carry a risk factor, but treating it doesn't actually improve their overall risk. So that will be the next stage of the study. So at the moment, I think if we find something that increases their risk, we would use typical treatments, which is statins, and making sure all their other modifiable risk factors are very low. Once we find this new risk factor which we're looking for, we have to prove that it's modifiable. So that's a whole other study, which would take another few years. Another a very important example or interesting example, and I don't want to jump ahead, but it is lipoprotein a, which people may have heard of. It's a subtype of cholesterol which is genetically determined. So you inherit it from your parents, or it spontaneously mutates when you're born, or before you're born. And this itself is associated with a significant risk of cardiovascular disease. And until recently, we haven't had any treatments for this. But now that we've found that this protein, lipoprotein a, or this molecule, is causing plaque, they've come up with a number of new small treatments which are currently undergoing trials around the world. There's a group in Australia that's really pushing or leading the forefront of this research. So that's how sort of things end up from idea to the lab to becoming into clinical practice. And I suspect this drug in the next 3-4 years, based on some of the early results, will be something we can use clinically and in the clinic to help patients who have this risk factor, which isn't captured in the classic risk factor algorithms.
So Daniel, talk to me a little bit about genetic predisposition and how some of these markers or other things you're looking for are linked to specific genes that you might carry. Now, you obviously don't know what those genes are yet, but if you discover those, do you see it as being possible that we're going to get to the stage where we start treating, we actually modify the genetics to stop them being produced in the first place, or stop these things happening? Is that a long-term goal?
Look, that's possibly, but it's very, very difficult to modify someone's genes. To go back to our sort of first principles, genes we inherit from our parents, and they're our DNA, and that codes for the protein. So from the gene to the person, there's a huge number of steps. The genes need to be read, and they turn into a protein. The protein gets folded, and then it's put in the cell, and then it goes out to the body. So anywhere along that pathway, we can really try and intervene if we think that the gene is causing a problem. Fixing the gene in the cell is very tricky. You've got to get it every cell and recode the gene. And there's some guys and some research groups are doing it, but it's very high tech and technical at the moment. And I'd be surprised if gene modification therapy is where we're going with cardiovascular disease at the moment. But some of those later steps, where the gene is read and where the protein is made, those are more likely targets that we can go for. And that some of these new medicines that we're looking at, particularly this one for lipoprotein a, is targeting early on that pathway where the protein's being created and being read and being folded. So while I don't think we're going to be modifying people's genes in a lab like in sci-fi movies, I think we are going to get more and more personalized and more into the integral details of biology.
So we all become very familiar with RNA technology through COVID, and this was a new technology. And RNA, correct me if I'm wrong, is like the sort of the template which transfers, is able to pick up what that gene looked like and mold itself into the template for making another one exactly the same. It's like a mold, really. So is that technology that's been developed so successfully in the COVID sense of actually being able to create very quickly anti-COVID immunization, is that got any reference to this while we're talking about genes?
It's in short, it's quite separate. I think our understanding of mRNA, which is and the mRNA and the RNA molecules, as you say, the messenger or the prototype genetic material, our understanding has allowed for the development of these COVID vaccines. And humans are made out of DNA, which is, there's 2 double strands, and other viruses are made up of just single of RNA, which is a different type of genetic material without getting too complex. So humans often use RNA to help transcribe the DNA, and without getting too technical, the our understanding of how we go from genes to proteins to human bodies is allowing us to find earlier targets on that pathway that we can use to treat heart disease and identify people who are at risk of heart disease.
So the earlier the better, isn't it, really? I mean, the quicker you can get onto this, I mean, do we see the stage where we might be able to find these markers in unborn babies and then say to mum, hey, as soon as you have this baby, it needs to get onto cholesterol, but anti-cholesterol drugs?
Possibly, but as you say, there's the risk benefit's quite nuanced. So we can't put statins in the water, not only because they've upset everybody, but also we probably don't need to. There's a whole bunch of people who would probably never really benefit from statins as well because they're resilient. And statins have got a number of not infrequent but side effects that people are aware of. And if we started, unless we were very sure and very targeted, using a sort of shotgun approach will probably cause more problems than good. But using these technologies, we can hopefully find a more targeted approach. And I don't know if we'll be putting people on statins as soon as they're born, but early in their journey, we'll be able to identify them and say, this is what you need to do to reduce your risk.
So in terms of coming to drugs then, what new drugs are on the horizon and how will your research affect the use of those?
So the latest class of drugs that a lot of people may have heard of are things called PCSK9 inhibitors, which are injection drugs, which are really powerfully reduce LDL cholesterol and the bad cholesterol. And these also have been shown to reduce heart attack and stroke and death from heart disease. This medicine purely targets the cholesterol pathway, or predominantly targets the cholesterol pathway, because we know, and we've known for so long, that cholesterol is a major risk factor. And these drugs have been in development for decades, to be brief. What we're going to be looking at is outside of the cholesterol pathway, so looking at the proteins and the gene pathway. So ideally, I'd be able to find a gene or a protein that perhaps it interacts with the cholesterol, it forms an aggregate with the cholesterol, which then causes plaque. And we could then use that either to, as I say, screen for people who are at risk, or even develop a medication that actually blocks that interaction and prevents the development of plaque. So it's all about finding things earlier and earlier in the cycle or in that mechanism pathway that for people who are having heart attacks. So yeah, it's very complex, and unfortunately, this stuff takes time. But without asking the questions and without looking, and even having even negative results are really important, so you don't end up going down these rabbit holes of things that aren't going to be high yield. All of this stuff gives us a better picture of biology and how disease happens.
So Daniel, just in conclusion, if you could sit there and say, I have a dream, what would your dream be by the end of your research, or maybe subsequent research, or where we might be with control of these unpredictable heart problems in, say, 5 or 10 years' time?
My dream, if I could solve this problem, I think I'd get the Nobel Prize for medicine. If I could say, actually, it's this particular cell or this particular protein, which we haven't found yet, or this particular RNA or whatever it is, this is what's causing the problem, and it's interacting with the cholesterol and the high blood pressure and the diabetes, and it's coded for by this gene. And if we can target it either at the gene level or the protein level, and we can block it, then we can stop the development of plaque in humans. We can prevent heart attacks, and we can make heart disease a thing of history. Now, I think it's going to be much more complicated than that, and I don't think I'm necessarily going to find it, but that would be my dream. And so for me or anyone to find that solution. Yeah.
Well, you've got me, Daniel. I think if any of us in our can use whatever skills we have and our ability to put together whatever monies we've been able to earn to make that dream come true, wouldn't that be a worthy cause that you would, for all eternity, people would be grateful for? It would be amazing. And I really thank you very much for such a good explanation. Have we got any questions, Jenny? Would you like to?
Tricky question. As with anything, a balanced diet is the way to go. So a poor diet with very poor nutrition, high in alcohol, a sedentary lifestyle, so people who don't exercise, people who smoke, all of those things impair the immune system and impair the immune function. But I can't say that if you have, 3 spoonfuls of activated turmeric every morning, your immune system's going to be particularly strong. There's no evidence of things that can make you super immune. It's all about avoiding the things that we know are unhealthy and avoiding the things that we know are toxic, and making sure we have a good balance of nutrients in our body to ensure that we've got all the building blocks for the immune system to function properly. So whilst there's no secret for promoting immune health, avoiding the bad things is really the secret. And everybody, I think most people understand that. It's an important question. So generally we say that people with autoimmune disease are at increased risk of cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis development because they already have some dysregulation in their immune system. And the precise pathways we don't quite understand yet, but certain autoimmune disease, lupus in particular, does lead to accelerated atherosclerotic disease. And it is more complicated than I've laid it out, because people who have heart transplants, for instance, and then they are on very strong immunosuppression to prevent rejection of the heart, they also develop coronary disease. It's slightly different to atherosclerosis, but they do develop narrowing of the heart artery. So even though I've sort of been quite sort of binary in the way I've described it, it is quite complicated, the way the immune system interacts with the body and causes heart disease. But in general, people who do have autoimmune diseases, and it depends on which one in particular and how powerful or how poorly, how aggressive that autoimmune disease is, it is generally associated with atherosclerosis.